We're continuing our video sit-downs, and now we're talking about the sheriff, and man over there is Casey Salisbury. He's the incumbent sheriff. Now, Casey, how many terms have you been in office?
I've been 3, and this will be number 4.
Okay. Are you the longest sitting?
Yeah, the former sheriff and I, Sheriff Weibark and I, both were the only 3 terms. And okay. Steve Keach encouraged me that somebody has to move on, and so if I was to make this term, it would be the first one that we know of to go 4 terms. Okay.
Well, I want to start out with, I mean, everybody pretty much knows Casey. I mean, Casey's everywhere, and everybody knows so. Casey.
That can be good and bad.
Let's talk about your top priorities in the sheriff's office.
Well, I'll give you the top priorities in the sheriff's office, but there's one looming top priority for the county. In the sheriff's office, Dedrick, and since we're still partway through the year, our priorities for this year, we do a strategic plan every year and what our goals and objectives are for the year. And so I'll talk about what we have for this year moving through the next year. The area of mental health. As you know, nationwide, mental health is a huge issue. And the reason it becomes a top priority for law enforcement, especially our office, is the area of mental health can also be a very high liability area. And so it requires a lot of training to be able to handle some of those circumstances. And that's so that when you testify in court or do something like that, they're going to ask you what's your level of training in this area. Last year we had asked for some advanced training money, and we didn't necessarily receive that, but we knew that we had a state requirement for all law enforcement officers in the state had to meet a minimum level of an 8-hour training standard. And we simply didn't have the cash flow to do that. So a friend of mine, former sheriff of King County, Susan Rahr, is the director of Criminal Justice Training Commission. I asked if rather than sending all of our officers up there and having to pay for food and days pay and driving and all that kind of stuff in an overnight, if we could move and have that training here. And we did, and we moved that out, and we did the 8-hour training. The basic training for most all of our people is done now for all of them, and we did it out at the Little Creek Casino. And so they brought staff members down here, 2 down here, rather than us sending dozens up there. And then we also, this last year, we did apply for some money out of the mental health fund, which we're grateful to receive. It's almost $100,000, and it was just to get the minimum number of people we needed through what they call the 40-hour CIT training class, critical incident training class for mental health. And we've now completed that. So we're not only staying up with that in the state, we're almost leading right now in that area, and so that's been a priority. We've got a couple more things to do, but that's one of our goals and objectives that we just about got that met over this year and for the future. A second one is our public schools. I've worked in the public schools. I did 9 years in the public schools as a school resource officer and DARE officer and whatever you want to call it during that time for Thurston County. And with all the onset, you can see the whole United States with active shooter trainings and those kind of things. Our concerns is for our public schools and to make sure we have the coverage that we need in those. During the last year, we worked very closely. I worked very closely with one of our superintendents and then coordinated with all of our superintendents in Mason County to move towards the Salem-Keizer threat assessment model. The response to the school active shooter situations and how those are handled in Mason County, every school kind of had a different protocol on how to go through that. We've now got that to where we're all kind of on the same sheet of music for all of our school districts, and we've done a lot of training through the Kitsap school districts, bringing that training here to our organization, and then work with North Mason on a deputy for the North Mason schools, because we've got Shelton mainly covers the South Shelton schools. So that's been a priority, and we're still looking to move forward to get another school resource officer, and we've been doing some coordinated efforts with our school staff and other buildings, our administrators and other buildings, to see about putting that funding available and together. The third one for us in the sheriff's office is traffic safety. We receive an amount of money, road diversionary money from traffic safety that we get that comes through Public Works. And we have to be accountable for that money, that where we're spending it is accurate. So when you hear these people out here spending money, everything that we have is documented spending. And so traffic safety has been a real importance. Again, that puts us in better situations in the school zone, in our high traffic, volume traffic areas in Mason County. As you know, or I guess I know, I should say I know, living here over 50 years, the traffic volumes have changed a great deal. Mason County is a lot different looking now with commuting in and commuting out than it used to be. So the work on using that traffic safety money efficiently and effectively, it's all documented. What we're putting into that is the other priority. And the last one that we worked on, big cooperative effort with the dispatch center, the communications, and the other entities in Mason County is a records management system. We talked a few minutes ago off camera about technology and the value that that brings. Well, when you've got thousands of documents and thousands of records, if you've got to hand file and hand search those, it takes hours and hours and hours, which makes that very, very expensive in staff hours. Where if you can sit down to a computer program, you can run the name and you can drop that information quickly, it saves a lot of time. Now, the technology does cost some money to put out, but this is a technology system that will work for us. Overall, in the sheriff's office, in the county, and with the dispatch center, along with jail management records, which we needed to update in this county and catch up with everybody else. And we're doing that this year with the other entities. It's quite a process, so to transfer all those records. So it's a great thing for us. We're working on it. We're getting very close. Those were the 4 for the sheriff's office. Okay. The last ones I want to toss out to you that it should be a county priority, and I want to make clear on this. It is not the sheriff. This is the county jail, and people associate the county jail with being the sheriff's because we occupy it. The county jail and the facilities, the facility itself, it's operated by the county and the county commission. That jail has been there. It's been over. It has not been the right size since over 30 years, and we've known about it. Every study that has been done up till just recently over that 30-year period says the jail is not big enough. And I don't get to build a jail. That goes through the county commission and a planning process. But when you want to talk about a priority for our county, the reason that jail is critical in this is that we have shown through studies and through the last years that when we are able to hold people accountable, the crime rate goes down. When we were cut off and I had to put caps on the jail because of funding, we start to watch the crime rate go up. It's a matter of priority. But every single study that has been done in our jail has clearly stated that the county needs a new jail because it does not have the jail capacity that you should have for this county. So those are priorities.
So priorities are pretty much like the same as your challenges.
Yes,
well.
some of them are different.
Well, let's talk about the challenges.
I think the biggest challenge facing our county government, and it faces me too, is stable funding. Every year since I've been here, I walked in my first year in 2007, and within about a year they wanted to make a big, huge budget cut right away as you walk in the door. Each year we don't know what the budget is. It's unstable. It's up. It's mainly down, and then each year we get changing budget directives every year. Well, this year we're going to do a biannual budget. The last year we're going to submit it one way. Basically, the state law says that for every elected official, is to submit a budget into the county for what you believe it takes for the office to run. From there, the commission can go through and move and manipulate and cut and paste and do whatever they want. But it's up to the elected official to submit a budget for what you believe needs to be in there. Not what somebody else believes or not what the commission believes or anybody else, but what you as the elected official believes it takes to run the office. And each year the challenge in that is the budget directions change on how you're supposed to turn that in. It's been a challenge every year, but the stable funding hurts us, and here's why. When you don't have stable funding, and I'm sure I've talked to the other elected officials, it's the same thing. We have been bringing in some of the best deputy sheriffs in the state, and I say we know that because they're qualifying the best at the academy when they graduate. You bring those new people in, and all of a sudden they're looking at, like last year when we took a $1.5 million budget cut, and they've got to start looking around deciding where I've got to go for my family. We have a couple deputies that have left recently because now they're on the bottom end of that, and they're looking around, and we still going in the budget year don't know if we're going to be cut again next year or not. So they start looking. It's the same for all the other entities in county government. So big challenge for me and the whole county, I think, is the stable funding and a stable budget. The second one, and we just talked about that already, is jail space. And again, I will tell you that every single study that has been, not me, but the county spent money on, every single one of those studies shows that it's clearly not enough space in that jail for a county this size, and it's been showing that since the 1980s. It's not like the county hasn't known. I haven't been here all those years. There were a lot of years that I didn't work here. I worked for another agency, and it was the same thing. If we were going to bring somebody to the Mason County Jail from the neighboring county, you had to call ahead and see if there was space. That goes clear back to the late 1980s, early 1980s, into the 90s when I worked at another agency. Always had to call, still have to. And those would be the two things. And I concern myself again, the reason that's important on these challenges is that we were able to show throughout the last couple of years, when we were allowed to outsource space, I mean go out and buy jail space from another county, that we could put people in jail, we had a theory that the crime rate would go down. And there, in fact, absolutely it did go down when we had the jail space. But if I'm given a limited amount of money for the number of people I can put in there, and at a certain point you have to put a cap on it. And if we can't do that, we can't put more people in jail, and you have to deal with the crime rate.
So what can be done to make sure that the Sheriff's Office has the funding? I mean, there's only so much of the funding out there.
Well, I know that there's been a whole bunch of different things in talking about this. Last year we talked, and we've talked about it for years, the 0.3% sales tax. Many, many other places do that. It's nothing new. Again, the issue that I had with this, I was very clear on it last year. People would ask me, do you support this? And I somewhat remained silent on that. And the reason that I did that was I followed the directives or the direction that my predecessor did in Thurston County that I work for. The sheriff came out over there and said, unless you can tell me where the money's going to be spent, I'm not going to ask the people for the money. And last year, when that came out to work towards that, and that was put on the ballot measure, put out there for a vote, I was deeply concerned because they would not say the areas that was going to be spent. Initially, there were categories, so much is going for each one of these areas. When that got pulled, just saying, give me the money and I'll spend it how I feel like, it doesn't cut it. The counties that have passed those have a priority of spending within that 0.3%. This much is for indigent defense, this as much is for the prosecutor, this much for the judge, this much for the sheriff, this much for the courts. If you can't put that out there, I don't think that's fair to the people to just say, I want your money, but I'm not going to tell you where it's at. That was withdrawn last year and just put out there, just give us your money, and I didn't agree with that. You talk, also the other thing that I want to cover, there's what's called road levy tax, okay? Now remember, this came up to me. I didn't bring this up, although I'm talking to you about it now. You brought this up. If you go back to 2007, 2008, I sat down there with my budget director at the time and argued this and argued this and argued this. And if you go back through, and I could have brought it with me today, a chart for the state of Washington that shows all the counties in the state. At that time, I understand there's 4 now. At that time I believe there was only 3 counties in the state that put more money into the roads than they do the general fund. There was only 3. And if you looked at it at that time, and I won't name those counties, although you could see, I can show you the chart on it. Guess what counties those were? The ones that were not doing well or failing in the budget areas. The other counties in the state of Washington and take much more of that money from the road levy tax and put it into the general fund. And that's a matter of that time of what the commission wants to do with that, the road levy tax. It's just a fact. I mean, there's nothing I can do about it, but you can look down the list of counties and see who gives the most money out of that. And we're the other way. I think about 51% goes out of the general fund and about 48% goes in. The other counties are exactly the opposite.
Okay, Casey, there's been a lot of talk about use of overtime dollars.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us how you use
Absolutely.
those overtime dollars?
I love this question because some of those people are giving you very uninformed information. And part of that is they either don't know what they're talking about or they're just talking in the wind. What you've got to understand about the overtime is it conveniently never gets brought up. You need to come down and look that we have separate contracts. U.S. Forest Service being one, I'll use that as an example. They provide us a certain amount of money to pay out overtime to patrol federal land up in the forest up there, okay? The piece behind that bothers me is people want to throw that in and say, well, that's county spent overtime. That money is not coming from the county. And when people say these deputies are making all this money on overtime, yes, they are. But that is money income from the U.S. Forest Service. We have other dollars and cents that come in for boating and other things on weekends for our boating deputies to go out there. The deputies that want to sign up on overtime because they've worked their work week and go out and work that boat, sure, they're making money and they're making overtime. That is not coming out of county tax dollars, not all of it. It's coming out of that boating fund. It comes money from the state. So when you take all these different contracts we have and put them in there and say the deputies are making all this money, it's way too far over in overtime, I ask you to take a step back, take those amounts out that are coming in from outside sources as revenue, and then do that billing. The second piece on this overtime issue that I want to cover that never seems to come up. When we are out there on the road, the other night, for example, we had a homicide in North County. We only have so many deputies on the street. The calls for service do not stop coming in. When we go out there, we have to have detectives go out and do evidence work. We have to have detectives go out and do interviews. You can't do all that by yourself. That has to be paid in overtime. The union says that people don't have to go out there and work for free. You have to pay that out. There is no way for me or any other sheriff or any other law enforcement executive anywhere to know what night that homicide is going to occur. We had a case earlier this year called the Emory case that was all over the news. Well, I had to go over and talk about funding about that because we don't have the money to cover it, and then everybody wants to yell and scream about overtime. The position that I'm put in is, unlike many of the other sheriffs, is to say, do I go tell a family that I'm not going to go out there and do the detective work and the police work needed to find out what happened to your family member just because we say we don't have enough money in the budget, or that people want to gripe about overtime? There is a lot of that stuff in overtime that we just simply don't know when those issues are going to happen. The other one that's a big one that people don't think about, when we go into court cases and criminal cases, and the court calls us and says, you will have the deputies that were on that homicide case in court to testify. They're mandated to be there. That isn't free by union rules. They have to pay them to be there. So much of that overtime money that those deputies are making too is directed because they have to be in court. And people kind of forget that. I will tell you that our deputies, I think sometimes would probably feel offended when people gripe about the overtime. They are so scrutinized. When they get ready to work, they've got to call into a supervisor, have that approved, and every bit of that is documented. So when you hear these voices out there saying overtime, extended overtime, please take into account the contracts that we have. They're actually covering that. They're coming in as revenue to cover that. Let's take that out of there. Let's take the court time out that we're mandated to be sitting in there, because the judges are telling you, you will be in there for a court case. You might sit there all day and not testify and be paid all day long and not testify. It's not my choice. And the last one is we have a crime in progress. If I'm on my way home and there's an armed robbery at a bank, I don't get to just drive by and not go. But the union rules and the rules, the labor laws say that you will be paid for the time that you work. We don't get to just leave halfway through a crime scene case. If it takes hours and hours and hours, we've got to stay there. So when people are out there talking about that stuff, they're not taking that in consideration. And our overtime budget compared to most overtime budgets is very, very low to our comparators. Anything else?
Okay, so there's a lot of stuff that we could cover, and we could probably talk for hours. Last thing I'd like you to say is just why should the voters return you to office?
Well, I think you need to look in any job at the education, training, and experience of those putting in for it. I can tell you that in different businesses and in our county itself, when we have failed to put somebody into a position and they don't have the education, training, and experience for the job, it goes bad quickly. I'm going into I'm a little over 28 years, going in my 29th year of service. I'm a graduate of the FBI National Academy. I have a master's degree in education. I have a master's certification in education administration. I have a couple of bachelor's degrees. I'm a graduate of the 250th law enforcement class in Berrien. The sheriffs of the state of Washington, I guess, trusted me enough to pick me as one of the few people in the state to represent the Washington State Sheriff's Association as their president to the rest of the nation. From there, the sheriffs and chiefs, in what's called Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police, elected me to represent all of the police chiefs and all of the sheriffs in the state of Washington to the rest of the country. There's only been a few sheriffs that have been picked for that position. I also, by the WASPIC Association, was picked to be the co-chair of the Small Agency Committee that represents small agencies, police agencies in the state of Washington. I've also been asked to represent as a co-chair on the Citizens Trust Committee for the state of Washington on how to work with people and organizations to bring them together. The sheriffs and the chiefs of the state of Washington, I chose myself and the chief of Mercer Island to do that. And recently I've been asked to go back and take a position I originally started, which was the liaisons to the police, liaisons to the tribal nations of the state of Washington. Another sheriff took that during my tenure as the president of the Police Chiefs Association and Sheriff's Association, and I also went from that to the director of the Sheriff's, president of the Sheriff's Association. So another sheriff from Pend Oreille County resumed that role, and I've just been given that back as to be the tribal liaison. And I would add a couple more things in here. It's been interesting that this year the other sheriffs and chiefs have been deeply concerned about a person coming into a law enforcement position that has absolutely no background, education, or experience, and no credibility in that. I have had sheriffs coming out of the woodwork to endorse me, so I'm going to say maybe short of maybe 4 sheriffs, and a couple of them are brand new that just came into offices and things took over. Every one of those sheriffs have endorsed me. Every one of the past sheriffs in this county have endorsed me. The past sheriffs and the current sheriff of all the surrounding counties have endorsed me. The Washington State Troopers Association and the Fraternal Order of Police. And I would say that if that many people are thinking that they can put their trust in me, I feel pretty good about that, and I feel very honored to have been selected to those spots. So that's why I think that education, training, and experience counts.
Thanks for taking some time
Thank you.
talking to us.
Thank you.